still add to the many things that our good friends have shared to you. But if there's one thing that I would like to take on, is the very statement of my good friend, Dr. Eman, when he said, nakakasuya kapag mag-isa. So I was wondering, dapat ang mga kasama sa audience ay yung mga kasama namin sa bahay. I don't have PowerPoint presentation and I don't know how to make one. I'm trying to make one. So I'll just be reading. For my students, they would know that. And many of my friends would call me a dinosaur precisely because of that. Just like Dr. Eman, I think I have prepared more than what you can chew. So what I'll be doing is to select some of the paragraphs that I'll be sharing to you. My paper is entitled Ethno-religious Identity, Ethics and Responsibility, Levinas Critique of Religion. Religion is the underlying motif in the uneasy relationship among the Moros, Christians, and the Lumans in the Philippines. It occupies the very foundation of their disparate notion of identity, history, understanding of conflict, and the search for peace. The distinct and various notion of a transcendental order, religion for that matter, is a basis of establishing the structure of the respective communities, which is the strongest challenge in establishing a harmonious relation among the Moros, Christians, and the Lumans in Mindanao. Levinas, in his discourse on God and philosophy, argues that the structure of transcendence is expressed not by religious experience, but by the ethical. Levinas' attitude towards religion is articulated in his critique on the Abrahamic religions and his understanding of Judaism. He radicalizes the meaning of religion from ontology to the ethical and reinterprets the meaning of God from a transcendent reality to the very locus of that ethical relation. His critique on monotheistic religions leads him to recover the spiritual life of Judaism as the basis of that relation. The social landscape of the Filipinos in Mindanao is divided into three distinct identities, defined by their own religious and socio-cultural traditions, namely, the Christians, the Muslims, or the Moros, and the indigenous peoples. The violence that causes and fears and anxieties among these three communities is a complex interplay of many and varied factors. It is an understatement to say that the conflict is between Muslims and Christians, which as a result affected adversely the conditions of the indigenous peoples. The causes are neither merely religious nor merely cultural, rather, historical, demographic, social, economic, and politico-military considerations are to be taken into account, including what Dr. Eman would continue to emphasize, colonization. The religious dimension, however, clearly appears as the overarching foundation of the conflict. While this is precisely the main aspect of the tension in conflict, it remains true, however, that the foundational element of the Moros' right to self-determination is Islam and the Islamic way of life, and for the Lumans is their cultural and indigenous way of life. It is the religious identity that underlies, and this is my position, it is the religious identity that underlies the conflict and legitimizes the right to self-determination and the perception that the Christians are the cause of the conflict that produces the tensions in the Muslim Christians or even in the tri-people relations in Mindanao. Now what I'll be doing is to follow Levinas' understanding of religion as a critique of that kind of relationship, for which I'll be, in the long run, using that framework, redefine the meaning of that relation. Religion as the ethical life. Religion as the ethical life is a dynamics of relation rather than a body of tenets and doctrines. Consequently, Levinas challenges religion as the basis of ethno-religious identities to transcend from boundaries and walls of separation rooted in the notion of absolute truth to an ethical responsibility for the other. The Holocaust, which represents the countless sufferings in the modern world, situates religion in praxis. It is to privilege praxis as a point of departure for both philosophy and theology. Praxis is the situation in which one finds oneself when one encounters any other person. Religion is no longer situated in the foundational belief of the Supreme Being, but as the structure of human relations. Religion, in a sense, is the relation, an encounter with the other, as the very expression of God. God is the relation, and not the transcendental being that defines that relation. Religion, therefore, is a response to the invocation of the other, according to Levinas. In the tri-people relation, the invocation of the other is expressed in the struggle for the right to self-determination of the Moros and the Lumans. It is the quest for peace expressed in the right to live freely the respective ethno-religious identities within the larger context of national identity. Religion, properly speaking, is not the quieting of the invocation. It is the mainstreaming of the marginalized and the oppressed. In short, Christians are challenged to reconsider the religion as the very mechanism by which such invocation, that is, the prayers of the Moros and the Lumans, is not only heard but realized as well. The Moros and the Lumans, on the other hand, are challenged to redefine the right to self-determination from an exclusivist goal of establishing the Ummah, the Islamic community, and the traditional cultural life on the part of the indigenous community in a bigger, wider community. In Religion and Tolerance, Levinas describes the meaning of Judaism as a religion of tolerance, and in Judaism, article, religiosity is defined as responsibility. It is this exceptional human condition or situation where you are always in the face of the other, where there is no privacy that I would call the religious situation. And in God and Philosophy, Levinas announces that the latent birth of religion in the other, prior to the emotions or voices, prior to religious experience, which speaks of revelation. The revelation, which is the invocation of the other, that gives rise to the religion in the other, is the very heart of Judaism. The welcome given to the stranger when the Bible, which the Bible tirelessly asks of us, does not constitute a corollary of Judaism and its love of God. But, Levinas says, it is the very content of the faith. It is an undeclinable responsibility. Based on this framework, Levinas radicalizes ethno-religious identity as an exclusive framework of welcoming the other. This requires ethno-religious identity to depart from the factors that legitimizes and restricts such exclusivist identity. For this reason, ethno-religious identity has to free itself from the clutches of absolute truths and historical claims by reorienting the notion of God as an ethical relation with the other. To welcome the invocation of the others would necessarily include a departure from the historical trauma that highlights identity and separation from the other. Ethno-religious identity is not a privacy that a community enjoys in a particular territory. It is in fact in that territory of one's ethno-religious identity that the other is welcome and cared for. To shelter the other in one's own land or home, to tolerate the presence of the landless and homeless on the ancestral soil is the criterion of true religiosity according to Emmanuel Levinas. Levinas therefore situates religion and the notion of God as the ethical relation between human beings. It is this ethical relation that God is experienced not as a knowledge about God, but as the active engagement of a person in the everyday life of the other person. In this ethical relation, Levinas insists that to know God is to know what must be done for the other. It is because God reigns only by the intermediary of an ethical order, an order in which one being is answerable for another. Religious life is precisely living out the ethical demand. Thus, Levinas is not really comfortable with Judaism that designates a religion the system of beliefs, rituals, and morals prescriptions founded on the Bible, the Talmud, and rabbinic literature, and often combined with the mysticism or theosophy of the Kabbalah. In fact, he insists that the monotheism that Judaism has brought to humanity is a religious life and not a religion. And that, okay, let me skip that. Judaism, therefore, is a religion beyond piety. It is eminently a religion for action, a mechanism for social justice. Religious life is responding to the underprivileged and marginalized sectors of society. Religiosity is definitely an obedience to God, but obedience is defined as living the call to responsibility for the poor, widow, orphan, and the stranger. It is what a human person does to alleviate the miserable conditions and suffering of the others that make him religious, and not the rituals and piety he performs at the altar of the houses of worship. The ethical life demands both the tolerance of and the responsibility for the other. The historical conflict shows that the policy of assimilation, which integrates the minorities, at least in our relationship with the Moros and the Lumans, within the ambit of national identity, culture, and development, is necessarily, at least based on Levinas, repressive. Understanding religion as ethical challenges the dominant ethno-religious identity, in this case the Christians, to welcome the minorities. The radicality of Levinas' notion of faith as welcoming the other is the ethical responsibility of the Christians to ensure that the ethno-religious identities of the Moros and the Lumans are tolerated, promoted, and, in the long run, even protected. It is because faith in God is the incessant preoccupation for the good of the other. Is this not what Levinas meant when he said that the I is infinitely responsible for the other? Levinas radicalizes religion further as an expression of freedom and responsibility to all. The notion of God is expressed as the urgent call towards responsibility. In his discourse on Judaism, Levinas insists on his ethical responsibility towards the underprivileged as the expression of God, of faith in God. Spiritual life is the uniqueness of existence. When Levinas speaks of an approach that must not be made with empty hands, uniqueness connotes a subjectivity that is fully attentive and primordially for the other. Responsibility is not an extension of the person. It defines her personhood. It is because uniqueness lies in the responsibility I display for the other. I cannot fail in my duty towards other men any more than I can help someone stand for my death. Levinas is so radical here that even God cannot substitute me in my responsibility for the other. No one, according to him, not even God, can substitute himself for the victim. The uniqueness of this spiritual life, Levinas emphasizes, in otherwise than being beyond the essence, is without identity and already a substitution for the other. In my view, therefore, it is not the identity of being a Jew as a chosen people of God that demands the ethical responsibility for all. In his understanding of Judaism, the idea of being chosen is not an indication of pride and closeness to God more than any race and nationality. Being a Jew originally expresses the awareness of an indisputable assignation to a responsibility for the others, which must be pursued as a manifestation of divinity in one's humanity. being the chosen people implies the primordial assignation towards responsibility for the others. Consequently, it connotes also the fundamental assignation of Israel as a nation to be responsible for all other nations. Chosen does not highlight the identity of the Jew. It is the eternal recurrence of the demand to be infinitely responsible for the others. The notion of being chosen, therefore, is not to be interpreted as the privilege of one religion over the others. In Difficult Freedom, Levinas locates religion in the proper understanding of the Jewish universalism. A truth is universal when it applies to every reasonable being. A religion is universal when it is open to all. This does not indicate that religion falls back into ontotheology as a reference of relation. Rather, it should be interpreted according to Hilary Putnam that all human beings are Jews. The response to the invocation of the other is the religious experience. The structure of religious experience is to understand Judaism and its reorientation of the meaning of God as a human encounter. Thus, being a Jew in a Levinasian sense is to be free from Judaism in order to become responsible to all, an incessant demand to ethical life and expression of true religiosity. Conclusion. Levinas radicalizes religion from ontotheology to the ethical. He situates religion and the notion of God as the ethical relation between human beings. The ethical relation demands the welcoming of the other. The ethical life demands the infinite responsibility for the other. This is the meaning of being a chosen people, of being a Jew. The initiative to responsibility is the primordial duty of being a Jew, an act that does not expect any reciprocity. Being a Jew is to live the original obligation to serve the others. By implication, the search for peace in the tri-people relation, namely the Moros, the Christians, and the indigenous people, can only start by transcending the respective ethno-religious identities. The assertion of ethno-religious identity in the tri-people relation trivializes religion and religiosity. It renders religion less religious because of its too much emphasis on ontotheology and its rootedness in history and cultural context. The ethical relation can only be achieved by bracketing the identity as the basis of the encounter. To insist that religion is the responsibility for the other, the ethical life, is to bracket ethno-religious identity as the tri-people relation. To welcome the other, therefore, is to pursue the otherness of the Moros and the Lumats only because I am a Christian, that's why I speak this way, outside the ontology of my being a Christian. It is alterity and not identity that renders proximity. Ethno-religious identity is not the way to relate with the other. Freedom is the liberation from one's identity as the structure of responsibility. Again, quoting Levinas, the ethical order does not prepare us for the divinity. It is the very accession to the divinity. And he ends the discourse on place and utopia by claiming, all the rest is a dream. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I insisted on the short introduction because I want more time for myself. So, yes, it gives me really genuine pleasure to comment on Dr. Pablito Baybado Jr.'s inaugural lecture on ethno-religious identity, ethics and responsibility, Levinas' Critique of Religion. I think I remember him as a young seminarian from SVD who once asked me about Paul Ricoeur And many years after, he is now with Levinas. I think I'm glad that you have quotation marks wasted your youth on this philosophy. I have always maintained that one should take seriously, but not too seriously, a doctoral dissertation in philosophy. To take it too seriously is not to finish it. To take it seriously is to finish it. So I'm very happy that I see here Dr. Opiniano, who was my advisee, and Dr. Baybado, and all the others, Dr. Emmanuel De Leon, who was my student. I was telling a colleague at Ateneo, incidentally, congratulations to UST, not because you lost basketball. You know, basketball is nothing compared to philosophy. Yes. I used to brag that we are the top philosophy department, but I think we are no longer there. Because I was telling, look at UST. They have a whole day on their inaugural lecturers, their recent PhDs, and we have never done that. So I told the incoming chair, you must do that next semester, and I will take care of the reception. It's very, very important to stay with a philosopher. You know, of course, there is an immense difficulty in understanding the philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas. I have a friend, a Franciscan, Indian Franciscan of the Franciscan order, who beat me because I did my dissertation on Recur for 8 years. He did his on Levinas for 11 years. So if that's not staying power, I don't know what it is. It's very difficult to understand his philosophy because, of course, it's non-Cartesian. It's not a philosophy of the clear and the distinct, where ideas are hierarchized, subordinated to one another. In fact, commentators say that in Levinas, ideas he continually passes from one idea to another in what is called an encroachment of ideas. So while he's speaking of an idea, it sparks a certain meaning, and suddenly you anticipate a new meaning. So a term can emit a spark of a unique meaning, and this unique meaning must never be congealed or sedimented in what he calls the said, because philosophy is about the saying, the addressing, and Levinas claims that in his texts, the saying and the said give sparks of meaning through the unsaid. That's why there is, if you catch the unsaid in his philosophy, there is a certain joy. And that is why, despite the difficulty of reading him, it is to experience another way, and he uses the word experience in the Levinasian sense. Does that mean to stay in your consciousness, in your head? But to experience is to be projected outside, to exteriority, to transcendence, which proves to be truly philosophical. Now, there is a little book which contains the principal vocabulary of Levinas, produced by two authors, Rodolphe Cana and François David Seba, and they chose 36 terms in order to explain his philosophical vocabulary. And the striking thing is that there's no term of religion. The term religion does not figure. And therefore, it is the unsaid in Levinas's philosophy. Okay? Because if you consider the titles in the two masterworks of Levinas, beginning with the 1961 Totality and Infinity, which is subtitled An Essay on Exteriority. Exteriority means precisely transcendence, the outside. And the second major work, which is Otherwise Than Being and Beyond Essence, understanding these terms, totality being a movement outside which goes back to the I, and being meaning the movement outside again which goes out but comes back to self-interest. Okay, I think we will understand that he is reacting to the entire philosophy, Western philosophy of 2,500 years, whom he claims have been just dealing with being, meaning being in the sense of maintaining oneself, persevering in oneself, not getting out of oneself, simply assimilating, going out to people, using them, controlling them, dominating them. So he's trying to make us aware of a new movement of going out, which precisely does not come back to self-interest, a going out to the real infinity, the real transcendence. And of course, the difficulty here is he's not afraid to call this transcendence God. This transcendence, which is absolute separation, he calls it the holy, because you cannot grasp it, you cannot comprehend it. This otherwise than being, meaning to say this reality which is palpable and yet not objective. Okay? He calls this God, but it's no longer the God of philosophers, it's no longer the God of Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is not a concept. And so, this God whose presence is the presence of an absence, how does this God manifest itself? And so, this God which is the presence of an absence, he says, manifests itself only in what he calls the ethical experience, which is the concrete responsibility to a concrete human being. And so for him, this God, therefore, is not a God who commands you, who forces you to do certain rules, as Dr. Baybado has explained. It is a God, therefore, that in fact, it's a God for post-modernity, because it's a weak God. It's a weak God, because this God, right, can only be met in those instances where people finally get out of their self-interest and come to the help of other people. In other words, there are instances, and this is before knowledge, even before you, and that's why he insists that we are originally ethical, even before we know, even before we are conscious of doing the good. This God whom you see in the face of the other, and the face, of course, is not supposed to mean the visible, but it's as if through the passage of the visible you see the invisible, right? This encounter with the other as alterity sort of brings out that good which is in you, because the I who has this other also in himself, but has forgotten it. And therefore, he will say, it's not about the forgetfulness of being, as in Heidegger, but it is about the forgetfulness of the other. And so, why do we respond to this caress of the divine? I think there is a Filipino explanation for this. And this is pointed out by Dr. Ibana in an essay on the in the prefix ka. If you go to the big dictionary put out by the National Commission under Almario, we have a whole line of ka. In other words, even before we become conscious of the ka, we are kapamilya, kapatid, kamag-anak, kaklase, kabarkada, kababayan. And even before we get to be kaaway, there is this pre-original bond, okay? And that's why he cites Abraham as the father of all nations, and that's why we are all Jews in that sense. And therefore, I think Dr. Baybado is correct in saying that we should discover a new identity, which is not ethnic, but ethical identity. And I hope you have written a very good essay if you will only bring that out. That yes, because it will also conform to Paul Ricoeur. Identity is not, we stress sometimes in identity the difference, but on a upper level, we are the same in the fact of ethical identity. So I think if you are able to bring out more this, what he means by the face of the other, and this transcendence, which is God, which is the presence of an absence. Okay? I think this verse, you will help a lot in building that, to show that even before we become Christians, Muslims, or indigenous, we have a bond already. There is a bond which we cannot deny. And that's why there is a bond which we do not choose. And that's why the ethical is when you see the humanity of each person. And that is very important. So, yun lang ang masasabi ko. Thank you for
may request Dr. Baybado and Dr. Garcia to occupy the seats upstairs, please. Then we'll entertain a couple of questions from the audience. This is our last, so you know the drill. State your name, year level, and address. And address to whom you are wanting your questions directed to. Questions? Yes, Dr. Agos.
Good afternoon. Joe Aguas. I just would like to share yung thought process ko habang pinakikinggan ko yung presentation mo, Doc Tomas. I think we share the same interest in dialogue. I've also done several articles on cultural and interreligious dialogue. Uh, when we talk of dialogue, whether that's cultural or religious, parang merong tacit acceptance or affirmation na may konting conflict. Yun yung tumatakbo sa isip ko. Kasi, bakit magkakaroon ng dialogue? And when we try to survey yung sa history ng sa human history, laging may conflict dun sa hindi lang sa culture. Let's talk about yung sa religion. Laging nandun sa human history yung conflict between or among religions. Pwede natin umpisan yan. Halimbawa, crusade. Okay? At hindi lang yung crusade. Hanggang ngayon, laging meron. Kahit dito sa atin, sa Mindanao, may conflict. So, kailangan yung dialogue. Pero, pag tinitignan natin yung dialogue kasi, cultural or religious, pumapasok palagi doon yung, kagaya nung sinabi mo kanina, yung ethno. Parang kailangan mong i-assert, or hindi naman i-assert, pero lumulutang palagi yung identity, yung subjectivity ng magkabila. Okay. Ito siguro, comment mo lang, kasi ito yung inisip ko. Is it now time to move beyond dialogue? Kasi kung sa dialogue na yun, we always bring into the table yung subjectivities natin. At sa tagal sa haba na, nung conflict, tas dialogue. Is it time now to move beyond yung dialogue? Kung yung dialogue na yun ay laging ilalabas yung subjectivities. Ang tinitingnan ko kasi, in one of the articles na isulat ko, from dialogue to hospitality. Yung hospitality, kinuha ko dun sa concept ni Derrida about hospitality. Siguro, ang inspiration ng hospitality na yun, yung plight ng mga refugees. Kasi kung halimbawa, kahit halimbawa, hindi lang yung refugees sa Middle East, kahit yung Rohingya people, diba? Parang mahirap establish yung dialogue sa ganong klase ng sitwasyon. Ang magiging parang last resort, or sana hindi last resort, pero isang alternative ay yung maging hospitable. Kasi pagka halimbawa, di ba, merong dumating sa yung tao sa harap mo o sa bahay mo, para tanggapin mo siya, hindi mo kailangang tanungin kung sino siya. Inaako mo na yun, yung kung sino siya pagka tinanggap mo siya, pagka naging hospitable. And I think yung gesture na yun ng hospitality could also be a gesture of generosity. So ang point ko is, from dialogue, we move, this is beyond dialogue, and moving towards hospitality. Your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Aguas, and for the information of everyone. He was also in my panel, and he gave us what he's doing today. My appreciation first to Dr. Garcia for wonderfully pointing out that there is a possibility of making a discourse on ethical identity. Originally, I did not thought of that because I thought like that would be an oxymoron or a contradiction of terms. But it seems that it's good to pursue, and in fact, the encouragement that he gave is something that I would like to seriously consider. Is there a possibility of moving beyond dialogue at any level where 2 or 3 people are gathered together? There will always be a relationship, and that relationship will always be mediated by dialogue. That's the reason why there is no such thing as beyond, what is under question is always the process of relationship. Let me answer your question in the context of how and in the context of our 500 years of celebration of Christianity in the Philippines. The fundamental question I think that we have to ask as a Christian country, if that is a politically correct statement, is this. If we have been Christian since 1521, then have we become the primordial mechanism? Have we become the primordial host? Have we become the primordial individual of providing a better life for the marginalized, the Lumans, and the Muslims? If until today they are still fighting for justice, then what celebration are we going to make? You are right when you said that perhaps since 1521 we have not been hospitable to them. So, while I may not agree with the term beyond dialogue, because when you go beyond dialogue in terms of we are talking about right now, but why can we not simply allow them to be and give to them, would that be the case? I really don't know, but my point is, when we become hospitable to them, do we give to them what they want? But is that not the same question that they should be asking to themselves? That they should also be hospitable to us. But again, going back to the guidance Dr. Garcia is telling us, the question what they do is their problem. My only problem is what have I done and what I do right now, that I am about to celebrate my 500 years of Christianity. So I think there is a need for us Christians, as we try to tell to the world that we have transformed this country from a colonized country to a Christian country, and I don't know if we can even talk about that, but definitely the whole sense of my reflection to what you're saying is that there is a need for us, and this is why I went to Levinas, precisely because we are tired of dialogue that is happening on mutuality and reciprocity. We need a model of dialogue that addresses the angst and concerns of the other outside the framework of the one entering into dialogue. Right now, when you come to my house, I am hospitable to you, I welcome you, but I welcome you according to my rules. I welcome you according to bawal ang tsinelas, dito ka pwedeng umupo, ito yung pwede mong gamitin na plato, and all that. But in a sense, I am the one dictating how you live your life in my house. But is there a possibility by which we welcome our Muslim students in UST, that while Christians, during difficult exams, have a chapel to go and pray to our God, that they too have a place to go and pray to their own God and ask for that assistance, that they may pass the difficult exams that we give to them. We are celebrating 500 years of Christianity, and have we given them the place by way of hospitality, or as Levinas would say, by redefining our relationship to them, my primordial responsibility as more fundamental in my relationship to them rather than the structure that defines my religion in relation to them.
May I add something there?
Yes.
Another term which is the equivalent of what Levinas calls faith is discourse. Precisely, human beings only have language, and therefore the meaning of the simple act of greeting the person is already acknowledging the humanity of the other person. I think today, my students, maybe this is people no longer notice other people. They're so busy with their cell phones that when they are being served, they don't say thank you. So Because Levinas's philosophy precisely is a corporeal experience of the other. Like if you bump somebody, you have to say, I'm sorry, after you, before. In fact, he says, what I am trying to do is a philosophy before an open door, after you, sir. I mean, mauna ka na. So this idea of really taking to heart, because the face doesn't mean doing good to somebody you don't even know. Hindi mo ka ano-ano, but to give him the basic respect, right? So this idea of, and that's why today his philosophy is most urgent, because precisely to encounter this reality is to hear. He mixes the two senses there. To see the face, if you really see the face, is to become aware, thou shalt not kill. This is the philosopher that dares to, and I think we are so basically so numbed that we don't even, we don't even react when people are killed nowadays. So this idea of no man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a part of the continent, a piece of the mainland. Every man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in humankind, and therefore never send anyone to us for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for you. So, this idea of where everybody is suffering, I think there also, there is a already, pag nakita mo yung pulis na sinampal yung tao, then you experience the same na hindi dapat gawin yun. So this idea of, it begins with discourse, in fact, by talking, by that what Simone Weil calls the purest and rarest form of generosity, which is attention to the other. Very important. The purest.
Qualification lang, siguro for lack of better word, ginamit ko yung term na beyond. But yung beyond is not really to move out of the dialogue or the realm of the dialogue. But it's adding more to the dialogue. That beside dialogue, there should be a sense of hospitality, of generosity. And I think Derrida distinguishes between the conditional and the unconditional hospitality. Most of our hospitality is conditional. I welcome you, but you have to do this, you have to do that. But unconditional hospitality is really accepting the other as another. And I think that's something that should be added to that notion of dialogue.
I definitely agree with that, Dr. Joby, and that's precisely why, as I've said, if we want to welcome our Muslim brothers and our Luman brothers, what conditions do we make for them to have a space, in our territory? Or do we provide to them that unconditional love of allowing them to thrive in our own space, that because of us, I think original generosity, it is through my unconditional care to them that they become better Muslims, that they become better indigenous people. To me, that is our fundamental question as we celebrate our 500 years of Christianity.
Any questions still? Yes, Dr. Albert.
Magandang hapon po. Sir Albella po. First, I agree with Dr. Baybado's idea that ethical something ethical should come about because it is actually ethical that overpowers or trumps out religion. And I think it is when the Samaritan forget that he is one, he was able to do what should be done. And I think that's a revelation moment. And though may panghihinayang sa gamit ng reliyon, I hesitate about letting go of religion as a good mechanism to implement generosity and peace. And what I have in mind is the possibility of making it work in the economy of being. So I'd like to, my imagination is making me think of how it appears as a third. And how justice can be implemented with the wisdom of love. So, and I think that is possible for a discourse because there are groups that will only work, or where there are groups where there are discourses that will only work through religion. Maybe because both groups would mutually believe would have a common belief, just like parang Christian and Moro din, di ba magkakapatid din lang naman tayo. So, yun, could we not, I think it's revelationally possible for these, for religious groups to have discourse in the economy of being under justice, or under rules that are guided by the wisdom of love. It might sound cheesy, yes, but I think that's also the intention of Levinas, to make people realize that we are first of all human, and we are practically coming from the same beliefs in the first place. So that, because the paper, I think, pushes its way to otherwise than we were beyond the essence, but there are many other areas still in totality and infinity that we can unearth and talk about just that. So I'd like to solicit your thoughts as well. Thank you.
That of course is mentioned also. What I do remember when I read Totality and Infinity and move on my reading to Beyond the Essence is that word that God struck me, the term philosophy of dialogue as ethical. And because I am into interreligious dialogue, I said, why not discourse on that? My presentation today is basically on my understanding of difficult freedom, but my initial discourses in my dissertation would be my interpretation and understanding on the two major sources, namely Beyond the Essence and Totality and Infinity. But let me tell you a story just to highlight what you have said. Definitely I agree with you. If you know Cardinal Quevedo, he used to be the Archbishop of Cotabato, and Cotabato is a main bailiwick of Muslims. There are very minority Muslims in that area, and he is the cardinal. And they've been doing interreligious dialogue for the longest time. One day, a sister came to him complaining, Cardinal, let me put it this way, we are all academicians. Buwisit yung mga Muslim na yan, right? Ang tagal-anda namin na natin ginawang mabuti sa kanila. We have done everything. We've been very kind. We've been very generous. Sinunog na naman nila yung bahay ng kapitbahay namin 3 days ago. Nasunog na naman, and they were responsible. And then he would be saying so many things. We better stop this. We're not going anywhere else. And the good cardinal said, well, dialogue, the goal of dialogue is not for us to determine. It is for God to determine. Again, when you talk about love and the wisdom of love as the very character of entering into an ethical relationship, as Dr. Jovi would say, there is no condition. Even that it is not a project to be accomplished. So you don't have a structure to go through, you do not have a purpose to go through, but you don't even define where you would like to live. Because at the end of the day, it is precisely the relationship as Dr. Garcia would always emphasize in understanding Levinas, it is a concrete experience, it is a body contact, and it is that very contact in itself that provides the very opportunity of living the ethical, or perhaps that notion of love that one can perform every contact that one is into. Okay. And perhaps, I don't know if Dr. Garcia can say more on that.
I think that's okay. That's you've said the essential. I think I think this justice is actually giving any person what is due to him or her, regardless of status, position, power, you know. So the face here is something which is the very humanity of the other, that this is tao kapareho ko. And also, I'd like to add perhaps, when Levinas says, thou shalt not kill, he does not mean only murdering, but he also means, and that is in totality and infinity, annihilating the possibilities of someone, like parents, for instance, who force their children to get a career which is not their passion. So this blocking the possibilities of somebody is also part of that, you know, and therefore I think it's always the ability to sort of to be, in fact, to allow the other to really and to put oneself in the distance, the way parents do when their children go up, to finally cut off the strings that attach to them, the umbilical cord. So this idea of making them realizing that the possibilities of the children are not their possibilities, accepting that, you know? Because I know a Jesuit who was disowned by the family when Filipino Chinese, when he entered the society, but he became a priest, and later on for some reason he had to leave, and the family gave a big feast. So I don't know whether that's, but it's really this idea of, you just know, I think the important thing here, the ethical responsibility, is that moment wherein you did something good, parang God, somehow you, without thinking it, you did something good to someone without calculation. And that happens, you know. So he's against an ethics which deliberates first and tries to, you know, no, that's what he means by we are immediately social ethical. You know what to do before. If somebody falls, you immediately rush to help this person. If you know how to swim and somebody is drowning, you immediately help, you immediately try to save him. So it's something that is already sort of there. Okay? And that's what he means by this ethical responsibility. Any little thing, whether to greet somebody, whether to give something, you know, it's but of course it's not something na naawa ko sa kanya dahil mukhang nakakaawa. No, it's not about pity. It's not about, it's just, you know, realizing how could I have done that. So there are moments where the divine caresses us, and we have to treasure those moments where we become selfless. Those are the moments to treasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Atlas.
Let's give a round of applause. Very provoking yet very practical exchange.